So Devin Zitelman, we're here for an episode of BioBlast with Joe Truitt, Chief Executive Officer of iEcure. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. I really appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. So, you've spent a lot of time in pharma, and, I think what's interesting to me and probably our viewers about your history is, you've held multiple roles. I mean, sales and operations, all the way through where you are now, leading companies, and factually, this is your fifth endeavor as an executive. And so, for those less familiar, can you give some additional background on you and your company?
Sure. So from my perspective, I've been in the, let's call it the pharmaceutical biotech industry, because I really started in the pharmaceutical industry working for a division of Abbott Laboratories. Without going into great detail, it was a joint venture called Takeda Abbott. So Abbott was bringing Takeda's products into the United States for commercialization. And I was fortunate enough to be hired as a sales representative in that organization. And so that's kind of where I started my career. And we were working on some really transformative products. One was Lupron Depot for prostate cancer. And then the other one was Prevacid for reflux disease. So these were two giant products. So I was fortunate to get in to a small division of a big company with great products, and was able to ride that growth wave over the first 10 years of my career. And what that meant is I got to do a lot of positions fast.
Yeah.
Right. So because, every other month they were expanding and they needed a product manager, or they needed a training manager, or they needed a district manager. So I was able to fill all those jobs. Or at least for a short period, touch those positions. And so that's kind of how I started. And then I had my first opportunity, downstream a little bit. I went out and worked for IMS Health for a couple of years. After I got my MBA, I wanted to see a little bit of the vendor side of the business, start to understand more of the operational side of the business. So it was almost like doing like a consulting role, working for IMS or IQVIA now. Great experience, spent a couple of years there. And then that positioned me well to be more of a general manager in the biotech industry. And so that's kind of how it transitioned. And the first company was a company that was named Aura Pharma, which was an oral health company that we were able to take public and go through that whole process and actually launch and commercialize the drugs, build the infrastructure, and then eventually sell that one to Johnson & Johnson. But that was the beginning. So that's kind of where it started. And that's kind of how and then from there, right, company to company, moving along into really interesting, working with a number of different interesting companies and products over the years.
Yeah, it's a great background. And, I'd be remiss to not state too that, iEcure just received an IND application approval and clearance from the FDA. It's marked your first in vivo, or rather the first in vivo gene insertion program to be cleared in the United States, particularly for infants. And so, obviously you've been able to grow the company and scale the company. And, what does it mean to you in terms of your professional journey to think about where you got started, to think about your military background, and how you kind of incorporated this to basically make and create history where we are, as of last week?
Yeah, see, I'm really fortunate that I'm able to work with, in this case for iEcure, the science is incredible, right? We're really on the frontier of genetic medicine, and we are working with the gene therapy program at Penn, Dr. Jim Wilson. This technology and program is really coming out of his labs. So we were able to take great science, phenomenal investors, right? We're some of the most premier venture capital firms in the world are supporting iEcure. And then my role was really to kind of organize the company around this. Well, when you have great investors and great science, you're able to attract great talent and people. So we have an incredibly experienced group working around the table here. So when you see that first, IND in that in vivo gene insertion for infants, that's a result of the teams that we've been able to assemble. It's really not a one-person exercise here. This is really a team sport. And we have about 20 employees here in Pennsylvania that are working to do this these submissions and ultimately transfer this quickly to the clinic. And so that was quite a milestone because it really hadn't been done before. And not only that, the other piece to that story is this is the first time in my career that we also decided to be really aggressive and go all around the world all at once for the opening trial. So as we sit here today, we sit on 3 regulatory approvals. So we can open up clinical trials in the US, Australia, and the UK. And so that's a little bit of a twist. Previously we would have just done one geography or one place to start the clinical trial. But we kind of felt like we had the team and the bandwidth and the experience to try to take this globally all at once. And so we'll continue to work on a few more regulatory filings. So ultimately we could end up with 5 or 6 approvals for clinical work in the early stages of the program, which is truly exciting. But you can only do that when you have the talent and the team and the experience to do that, which we're fortunate to have.
Yeah, I mean, that makes really strong sense and logical sense. Obviously, going global is a big endeavor and kind of a rarity, I would say, in the space. And so when you think about talent, we talked a little bit about talent as we prepared for this meeting. What is your approach to talent? I know over the years you certainly have a lot of learnings and a lot of sort of reverse engineering of maybe some challenges. And so I'd be curious to know how you now in this role in this company you approach talent acquisition and talent management.
And so we were fortunate because, well, in this company, which is very different than a lot of the other ones that I've been engaged with, is I was employee number 1. So employee number 1, I was able to have a vision about how I wanted to really create the culture. I know that word gets overused, but it really is important. What kind of company did we want to have? What kind of people did we want to attract? And so when we worked on that, and I say we because there was a couple other senior management people that I brought in initially, guys that I had worked with, again, at other companies successfully. And we all kind of gravitated to each other because we kind of like working with each other. We like the results we've been able to produce. And so we kind of set the culture first. We said, okay, this is kind of our vision on how we see our company operating, the kind of people we want to work with. And then we interview through that lens, right? Of, are you a good motivational fit for this culture? And so it takes a little longer to do the recruiting, but 2 things happen. One, people who are interested in that kind of culture will gravitate towards you. So you'll get a lot of inbound calls, and we were able to hire most of the folks here through networking. And then you're able to assemble this group that has kind of a common motivation about how they want to work, right? And what I mean by that is probably common to a lot of people in biotech, but we're very fortunate. And I always say leading a biotech company, I think it's counterintuitive, but it's actually a little easier than you may think because we always have the patient at the end of our production. So everybody here wants to make an impact on these really terribly afflicted people. And so that's always motivational right off by itself. And then the second thing is because we're a venture-backed kind of startup company, we have equity to distribute for all employees. So we also have a common economic objective. So we've got the equity, we've got the patients, and then really as management, we just have to put together the right kind of environment for people to work productively. And that's what we've done. And so we do spend an enormous amount of time on talent. We will leave a position open for a year rather than fill it with someone who we think would not fit kind of into the current environment that we're operating under. And that being said, we are 20 some employees now. I'm sure if you're managing 500, it's very different, but you can still put some basic guardrails around this. But we really do think that it makes all the difference in the world. And for those people who've operated in biotech, you'll see it happen all the time. Wherever you have a gap in talent is usually where the chain will break. Yeah. Your regulatory person's not good, you'll have a problem there. If your manufacturing person's not good, you'll have a problem there. And the worst case scenario is if you have a bad commercial person, because you don't find that out until you launch the product well down. So it's much, so it really has to be synchronized and harmonious across the whole development spectrum for these programs. And the kind of people you bring in really make a difference, and the attention to detail they have, because no one can know every aspect from the technical perspective of putting together a biotech company and then take it to its another level when you're starting to do regulatory work and commercialization on a global basis. It's even more complex. But that leads us to the fact that because of the market we're in, which is the kind of the Philadelphia market, it's an incredible talent pool. Because GSK has operations here, Pfizer has operations here, Merck has operations here, and a lot of biotech companies. So we were able to kind of garner the talent locally to come in and do the things that we need to get done. And so far, so good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, scalability and being in this growth stage obviously is sort of the most, among many important milestones within a company's journey. Setting the culture, setting the tone for what you're doing, obviously, with your talent pool and with the key staff that you have. It's a long journey. You mentioned 10 to 12 years, billions of dollars in R&D and OpEx, and obviously trying to stand up the company in kind of wavering macro environment is also equally as challenging. But you mentioned too earlier, Joe, that you sort of handle external endeavors with the board and investors, and you have really developed a strong relationship with some of your, I would say, more legacy team members. And so, what are your guiding principles as a leader, as a manager, and maybe more importantly for folks to understand is how you mitigate those risks?
Yeah, those are some good questions, Devin. And so let me just start out with this. So this is my fifth biotech company. Because I'll say me and a lot of the people here have worked in a lot of different companies. We've seen what we really like, and we've seen things that work well and things that don't work well. And so one of the things we did right after culture and saying, okay, what kind of company are we going to work in? It was governance. How are we going to structure the operations of the company? And I think people don't spend enough time on this. And what does that mean, for example? So, for example, project management reports into the chief operating officer, right? I'm just going to give you one example. And therefore, no timelines, budgets, or anything can ever be changed without kind of that approval, because you need someone to be a conductor of this very complex orchestra called drug development. And so if you have, I've seen companies where project management will just be working as a separate function, or there's, not kind of this cohesiveness, and things will get disoriented a little bit. And right, you can appreciate, the drug supply needs to be sitting in the depot in the country that you're doing the clinical trial in. Sounds easy, but if you really take that all the way back, that goes all the way back to initiating manufacturing and making sure you're doing it efficiently, getting things cleared, getting things where they need to be, and all the pieces in place. So we spent a lot of time on governance. And then the other thing that we do is we like to sit in a room, maybe because we're all paranoid, but we like to look at every risk. We try to identify all the risks. And then we start risk mitigation strategy. And interestingly enough, I know, from a risk perspective, I actually take the risks that we identify as the critical ones, and I share those with the board of directors. I have a slide in my board meeting. Here's the key risk, because I want them, not that I want their solutions or I'm asking them to step in. I just want them to know that we're aware, that we're working on it. And if something emerges that, we might be coming back for additional resources or support. But we spend a lot of time on risk mitigation. And it's really interesting as you take your program through development, when these things emerge, they're not crises because we've already thought about them. Right. We've already thought through how would we mitigate this? How would we operate if we hit a road bump? And there's lots of different risks, obviously, that we're facing in drug development, but really important part of the culture and the way we operate. And so back to talent, we want people who are technical experts in their area so they can help us to identify the risk, because I can't figure out every risk, from a quality perspective or a manufacturing perspective or a clinical operations perspective. But the folks who run those functions, they've been doing it very successfully, so they know, and they'll bring it forward. And so that's kind of how we do that. And we don't ever frown on someone bringing forward a risk or a concern, as you and I had a brief conversation on, but as long as they offer up a solution and a recommendation on how we can work around it. And that's how we encourage people to be engaged and have ownership in their functions and what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think just having a collective voice, right? I mean, it starts with you and your colleagues in the C-suite, but really, sometimes organizations are very bottom up. And I think biotech in particular, whether it's a chief scientific officer becoming a CEO or bringing in a partnership, it kind of starts at the top. And, a lot of companies obviously form this way. It could be big tech, it could be some of these emerging opportunities that you're seeing now, but, bringing in varying skill sets to not only look at technical talent and skill sets, but the productivity and the efficiencies within the work, the walls of the office and lab is important. And building that community, I think, is equally as important. So you've been obviously, to take a step back from Philadelphia first and then come back to it, you've obviously been involved with a variety of companies and geographically very different geographies. And so from a macro lens, just in terms of the sector right now, where do you think we are in terms of its evolution and trajectory? How is it different from years past? And where do you think we're going to be in, 10, 20, 30, 50 years?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing if you do take a step back, right? So I've been doing this now for 30 plus years. The evolution has been unbelievable. As a matter of fact, if you stepped away for probably more than 3 or 4 years and came back, it's almost like a different industry.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's some commonality, but the way we operate, the way we do things, the pace of evolution, the innovation has been so fast. So I think, from the perspective of will the markets and will the companies and everything keep evolving, the answer is yes. We have to get more efficient. The cost of drug development is just exorbitant. So we have to figure out ways to be more efficient, just from the cost of capital, right? So the rising interest rates have caused capital to become much more expensive, but the costs haven't necessarily come down. If anything,
Right.
There's been inflation and they've actually increased.
Right.
So it's kind of a catch-22 for the biotech teams. So we're constantly working on efficiency and models that have, for example, we are very careful back to talent, right? We don't just add headcount. Headcount has to pass a lot of hurdles before we bring a person into the company, because we know that that's a burden the company then has to carry. And we also know that inevitably there are delays and things go sideways before they go forward in biotech. Very few companies start and go right to the finish line on a straight line. Unfortunately, I've not had the pleasure of experiencing that. It's always some challenge that we're working through. And so, we don't generate any revenue, right? So we're working on by the grace of the investors and their dollar. So we have to be really prudent with that. And I think that's been something that's just changed over the last couple of years, right? In a 0% interest rate world, there was a lot of valuation, a lot of cash. That has kind of come back home to where efficient operations and execution are much more appreciated and required in order to, really move these companies along. And so I think that has been one of the changes. I think that, the ability for people to work in these complex environments, we really have to make sure we have people that can operate in this kind of world. We're actually going to do a little internship here. We've got a bunch of young hard chargers that are going to be coming in over the summer. Part of that is, I think, that the big companies don't have these development programs like they used to when I graduated from college a long time ago, where they would take you and put you in all these different roles and then eventually you become a manager and kind of move around. I don't think that exists as much. We don't see those kind of folks. So we're doing a little bit of our own work there on talent development. They may not end up working for us, but they'll work somewhere in the ecosystem. And like I always joke, some of these people are so talented. I want to know them when they're young, so maybe when they're CEOs, they'll hire us and support us. But that really is probably going to be one of the big challenges for our industry, is making sure that we have the talent to lead and develop these programs. And so it's kind of how I see it. And I think there's pools of geographies where the talent kind of resides. We're certainly open to flexible work schedules and people come and go, and you got to get the talent where it is. But I will say there is something about drug development that is just done better in a conference room with a team than on Zoom.
Yeah.
It really is some of our best conversations are just in the hallways and just walking into people's offices. And it's sometimes a little hard to do that when everybody's remote. That being said, when you're a 20-person company, there's people going to conferences, and there's always some remote aspect of our operation.
Yeah. I mean, I think industry at large is changing. I think we're in the forefront. And what I've said for a couple of years now is I think if anything, the pandemic kind of accelerated these trends that were already happening. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever get to a 4-day work week like some of the other proponents of that. But I don't think we're far off either. When you think about a 9 to 5, historically, you have a lot of folks in different industries that work really well at night or really well in the morning. Yeah. And so I think just having that nimbleness and ability to be flexible is really important these days. And obviously, the access to talent in Philadelphia, just given a lot of the institutions and the presence of UPenn and Drexel and CHOP, among others, has really, I think, seen this paradigm shift between what was historically maybe more academically driven spinoffs and company formation. And, with a lot of the consolidation and restructuring and activities that you've seen over the last couple of years, that's where you actually get some additional productivity gains, because you have folks that have been working together, have been having conversations around their water cooler, and they just kind of need that idea and the ability to assemble a small team and begin to pursue it. And I think getting started in that pursuit of greatness, the pursuit of scientific endeavor, is really where it all starts. And so, from a community perspective, obviously there's a lot of that in Philadelphia. And so kind of taking it down more to the city itself, what does it mean to you to be part of Philadelphia scientific community?
Yeah, well, it's really a great honor, right? I mean, we're working with world-class institutions, right? I'll just use our company as an example. So we're talking about the premier institution, University of Pennsylvania, but then inside of their gene therapy program, which is really where a lot of this started. And so we're just working with incredible innovators and scientific minds. And it's just really kind of, sometimes you have to take a step back and like, wow, I'm in the room with these people and look at what we're going to do. Where, I mean, in our case, Devin, we're going to take children who were born with a dysfunctional gene, and they basically go to they either pass away or they have to go off for liver transplant. So it's a terrible outcome either way. And the potential of this science is that we might cure these people, right? Now, that's a big thing to say, that we're actually going to cure them, but that is our goal. Our goal is to do this process and infuse this product, iEcure 506, and to cure this genetic disease. And if that happens, that's just an amazing achievement, and what a crowning achievement for the city and for the institutions and the people that we've dealt with. Now, again, here we sit, right? We're on the front edge of the development. But if you go down to the gene therapy programs labs, there's people who've been working on this project for a decade.
Right.
Right. So to us, it seems new and fresh, and we're only 3 years into the company, but they've been at this for 10 years just to get it to IND. And how many programs never get to an IND? Right. And especially in this kind of a complex, innovative area. So working in that kind of ecosystem with those kind of minds, with a great team, or because we can call in all this talent, really makes for the potential, at least, to be successful in our operation and in our objectives. So it's really a unique experience. That's why when the venture capitalists asked me if I was interested in heading this company, it took me about 2 seconds to say yes.
Right. Because
I was like, okay, great capital, great science. I mean, potential to cure some patients. I mean, what else could you ask for if you're in biotech?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's often overlooked.
Right. I mean, no, it was really just a great scenario. And I think that's why and then you say, well, how are you able to attract talent? Well, because I think they do the same assessment, right? They say, I want to work on these kind of exciting things, because you're going to work as hard as you like. At least the people we hire, no matter what they were working on, they'd be working on it really hard.
Right.
Right. So it's just kind of pointing in the right direction. And one thing I wanted to come back to and say, I I don't think a 4-day work week will ever work in drug development biotech. And I'm going to tell you why. Because there's two things working, or three things maybe. A, we are on a mission to get these drugs to patients, right? And if you're working on stuff that's really devastating, time matters. They need these drugs, right? The second thing is if you're losing 20% of your productivity, well, that means you got to extend your runway by 20%. And remember, we're very capital intensive and we have no revenue. So we've got to pedal really fast and run really hard. And then the third thing is in this world that we operating in is the competitive landscape, and the innovation is so rapid that if you're sitting still, someone's just going to blow right by you because they're going to innovate, they're going to work harder, they're going to execute. And so I think we're a little bit of an old school world of you really have to put a lot of hours in. Yeah, maybe we'll go from 80 to 70 hours a week. We're not going from 40 to 32. That's not the world we operate in. And people don't come here who want that world anyway. If anything, I think technology, to your point, has actually created more work opportunity because now they take it home with them.
Right.
Before you went home and, work was work and you were home. Now you've got cell phones, the computer. We're working on a global basis. So, for example, we're doing drug development in Australia. It's already tomorrow there, 12 hours ahead.
Right.
It's like, so we'll have conference calls at midnight.
Right. Yeah.
So that's just kind of the world we live in. Very different than a bigger machine where maybe things are, they have more infrastructure, more people. We just don't have that luxury.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. And I think often overlooked, is you're developing, you're developing drugs and you're developing therapies ultimately to meet a patient where they are, right? They're typically having a very difficult path because of whatever disease they're dealing with. And so when you think about, pharmaceuticals and the price of drugs, which I believe should come down, but what's often overlooked, I think, as maybe more societally, from a societal stance, is just you have to burn a lot of cash to get to whatever you go into your cabinet to grab, right? Or to go administer at the clinic. And so, I think just having folks recognize that, and obviously working together with the public sector to work through that as well. I mean, there's obviously a lot within this administration that is looking to fix drug prices. You have the Baird-Doyle Act, but it's really important points that you brought up here, and certainly something that we follow. And we're working, just to change gears a little bit, with BioBuzz. And so BioBuzz, we have a great relationship with their team here in Maryland and certainly in Philadelphia, where we have an office at Shared Partners. And so what does it mean for you and your team to be named as a awards finalist for this year?
That's a great question. And I'm going to tell you, it means a lot because there's a lot of great companies around, right? And people doing great work. And we're a nose to the grindstone type of group. We're just doing our thing. And when someone externally recognizes the work that you're doing, it's a real jolt of energy and recognition to the team and to the company. And everyone, I think most people want to work for great organizations, or they want to be able to say, I work in a great place, right? I don't think people want to work in suboptimal organizations without good goals and vision. And that's why people get really excited about great companies. And so when someone external like BioBuzz kind of looks in and peeks over our shoulder and says that we meet the qualifications to be nominated, it means a lot to us, and I'm saying us as the team. And then to me personally, I really think it's critical because it kind of is a vote of confidence in what we really set out to do, which was to create a great company doing great things. And so I like it because it also is an external validation for all the employees that what we're doing meets at least some external view of being worthy of recognition. And so that it's important. It really is. And that's why, we're really excited about the nomination, and, we certainly talk about it internally, and it doesn't go unnoticed.
Yeah. I mean, as they say, give credit where credit's due. And so, you have a great team underneath you, Joe, obviously a lot of experience, and your dedication to the Philadelphia community and frankly, patients is inspiring. And so I'm looking forward to having many more conversations with you, and really grateful for you spending time with us today.
No, thanks, Devin. It's been terrific, and look forward to continued engagement.
Yeah, well, we'll see you soon. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.